They call this God's country, looking out over the endless rolling expanse of the Appalachian Mountains, bathed in the hazy gold of late afternoon. You could almost believe it. Peaks layered upon peaks, ancient and weathered, cloaked in forests so dense they swallowed the light just yards from the road. Beautiful shore, in a way that feels vast and indifferent, like a sleeping giant that might crush you without ever noticing. But peaceful? No, not to me. The quiet here isn't peaceful. It's watchful. My name's Deputy Sarah Miller. Knew his relative in a place like Collier County, where families trace back centuries and outsiders are regarded with polite, unshakable suspicion. I'd been here 3 weeks, transferred down from Richmond after the screaming matches faded, after the casserole stopped arriving, after the silence in Mom's house became louder than any argument had ever been, after I couldn't stand the pitying looks or the constant, crushing weight of knowing I should have been there, should have done more. This remote posting wasn't a step up. It was an escape. Or maybe a sentence. The isolation felt appropriate somehow. Deserved. Sheriff Brody didn't ask why I requested the transfer. He probably didn't need to. Men like Brody, carved from the mountain rock itself, tend to see more than they let on. He runs the Collier County Sheriff's Department out of a squat brick building that smells perpetually of damp wood, stale coffee, and something vaguely metallic, like old filings. He's got maybe 20 years on me. Face a road map of deep lines. Eyes the color of faded denim that hold a weariness that goes bone deep. He speaks slow, chews over his words like tough jerky, and wastes none of them. He called me into his office on my 3rd day, the air thick with the smell of rain and pine drifting through the open window. He didn't offer coffee, didn't small talk, just waved me into a creaking wooden chair opposite his cluttered desk. A strange symbol, like a stylized eye crossed with a spiral, was carved crudely into the desk's surface, smoothed by years of handling. "Miller," he began, leaning back, the springs in his chair groaning. "You'll be taking some of the ridge patrols, County Line Road, Black Creek Hollow, up towards Widow's Ridge. Gets quiet out there." His gaze was steady, measuring. "Radio reception spotty. Cells useless. Mostly, it's just you and the trees." He paused, letting the silence stretch, watching me. "Place like this," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "got its own ways. Own rules. Different from the city." He leaned forward, resting his weathered hands flat on the desk, right over that strange carving. "Got 3 rules you need to know. Not suggestions, not folklore. Rules. You follow them. Maybe you stay out of trouble. You don't." He didn't finish, just let the implication hang heavy in the air. My city cynicism bristled, but something in his eyes, a flicker of old, remembered fear, kept me silent. "Rule 1, Brody said, his voice flat. "Your radio, sometimes out on the ridges, it'll pick up music. Old songs, fiddle tunes, mountain ballads, stuff nobody's played in 50 years. If it happens, change the channel. Switch to dispatch, switch to static, I don't care. Just don't listen to the end." Never listened to the end. He didn't explain why. The certainty in his voice was explanation enough. Rule 2. He hesitated here, his gaze flickering away for just a second before locking back onto mine. Harder this time. "Static can play tricks, make you hear things. Sometimes it might sound like someone you know. Someone close." He paused. "If you hear someone call your name, Miller, and it sounds like your mother." My breath hitched. How could he possibly? His eyes narrowed slightly, acknowledging my reaction without comment. "If it sounds like your mother's voice coming through that static, you don't answer. You don't key the mic. You don't even whisper it back in the car. You hear me?" don't respond. The intensity was startling, chilling. The unspoken or else was deafening. My throat felt tight. The grief I'd run here to escape suddenly fresh and raw. And Rule 3, Brody finished, his voice low and gravelly. This one's the most important. Sometimes, maybe late, maybe when the fog rolls in thick, two things will happen at once. Your radio will go completely dead silent, not static, just nothing. And the woods will go silent too. No crickets, no frogs, no wind, nothing. Like the whole world's holding its breath. He leaned closer. If that happens, Miller, you don't investigate. You don't wait. You get in your cruiser, you turn it around, and you leave. Immediately. Don't look back. Just drive until the sound comes back. Understand? I nodded numbly. The rules felt insane, ripped from some backwoods ghost story. But Brody wasn't smiling. His face was grim, etched with a certainty that defied logic. He pushed a heavy set of keys across the desk. Unit 3. An older model cruiser, reliable but basic. Shift starts at 1800, he said, leaning back again, the moment of intensity passing. Stick to the main routes tonight. Get the feel of things. We'll talk more tomorrow. Dismissed. Now, pulling onto County Line Road as dusk bleeds purple and orange across the mountain peaks. The rules echo in my head. The cruiser smells faintly of pine air freshener and something else. Something vaguely like ozone or damp earth that seems to seep in from outside. The road winds upwards, asphalt giving way to gravel, trees pressing close on either side, their branches like grasping fingers in the fading light. The radio crackles beside me, dispatch chatter occasionally breaking through the static, a fragile link to the normal world. But out here, the normal world feels thin. The beauty of the mountains is edged with something sharp, something ancient and watchful. The silence beneath the wind and the engine's hum feels deep, expectant. My hand hovers near the radio dial. Just follow the rules, Brody said. But a cold dread settles in my gut, whispering that in a place like Collier County, the rules might not be there to keep me safe. They might just be there to mark the boundaries of the cage. The first week bled into the second in Collier County. Days were deceptively bright, filled with the mundane rhythm of patrol reports, lukewarm coffee, and the guarded pleasantries of townsfolk whose eyes held generations of mountain secrets. But the nights belonged to the mountains, to the suffocating darkness that pressed against the thin bubble of my cruiser's headlights, and to the ever-present static crackling from the radio, a constant reminder of my isolation. Routine and patrols became exercises in managing low-grade dread. I learned the twists and turns of County Line Road, the deep shadows of Black Creek Hollow, the unsettling quiet near Widow's Ridge. The beauty was undeniable. Moonlight silvering the peaks, mist clinging to the valleys like breath. But it felt alien, ancient, utterly indifferent to human concerns. More than once, driving those lonely stretches, a wave of grief would hit me so hard I'd have to pull over. The image of Mom's face in those final days, superimposed onto the dark tree line. This escape felt more like a cage, the bars forged from my own guilt. I'd fled the city's accusing silence only to find a louder, more profound silence here, one that seemed poised to swallow me whole. Brody remained an enigma. He'd assign patrols, grunt acknowledgments of my reports, his faded blue eyes occasionally lingering on me with an unnerving mix of pity and calculation. I'd tried once to casually ask about the old songs he'd mentioned. He just gave me a long look and said, "Some tunes are best left unsung, Miller. Stick to the rules. End of discussion." The strange spiral eye carving on his desk seemed to watch me during our brief interactions. The radio remained a source of constant anxiety. Its bursts of static weren't random. They felt timed, almost conversational. Sometimes Just as a particularly painful memory surfaced, the static would sharpen, deepen, like an electronic sigh. I started leaving it on the main dispatch channel almost constantly, needing the anchor of Brenda's bored voice, however distant. The first real test came on a Tuesday night. Thick fog, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke, had rolled down from the ridges, reducing visibility to a few yards. I was cautiously navigating the treacherous curves, heading back from a pointless check-in near Widow's Ridge. The world outside the headlights was a swirling white void. Then, the radio crackled, the familiar dispatch chatter dissolving not into silence, but into music. It started with a lone fiddle, achingly clear, weaving a melody that felt both ancient and immediate. It spoke of sorrow, of things lost beneath deep water and dark trees. Then the voice began, high, pure, female, filled with a grief that resonated with the raw wound inside me. It sang of waiting, of promises broken by the river, of shadows walking when the mists were thick. Rule 1. If your radio starts playing old folk songs, change the channel. Never listen to the end. Brody's flat voice cut through the hypnotic pull of the music. My hand froze above the radio dial. God, it was beautiful. Heartbreakingly so. The singer's sorrow felt like my own, amplified, given voice. Part of me, the part hollowed out by loss, desperately wanted to hear the end, to know the story, to wallow in that shared melancholy. Maybe hearing it all would offer some kind of twisted solace. Where the cold creek runs and the willows weep. The voice soared, pulling me deeper. A lonely vigil I must keep. Never listen to the end. The imperative felt cold, sharp. A splash of icy water. What happened if you did? Did the song impart some madness? A curse? Did the singer find you? Shaking, I forced my hand to move, jamming the channel button, switching frantically. The music vanished instantly, replaced by the jarring normalcy of static, then Brenda's voice reading a license plate. The sudden absence of the song left a ringing silence in the car, louder than the music had been. My heart hammered. The melody, however, remained caught in my head, repeating the lines about weeping willows and silent vigils. The air felt heavy, expectant. I flicked my high beams, peering into the impenetrable fog. Did something move out there? A pale shape, vanishing into the white. Or just nerves? The rest of the drive back was agony. Every crackle of the radio made me jump. The melody looped relentlessly behind my eyes. When I finally pulled into the station parking lot under the first gray light of dawn, something was tucked under the windshield wiper. A single pale wildflower, petals shaped like teardrops, impossibly fresh despite the night's chill. My breath hitched. It was a willow herb bloom, the flower from the song, the one woven into the lost lover's hair. I didn't touch it. I stared at it for a long moment, the fragile bloom a terrifying confirmation. This wasn't random static or local folklore. Something was out there. Something knew the song, and somehow it knew I was listening. The following nights were worse. Sleep offered little escape, filled with fragmented dreams of haunting melodies and Mom's disappointed face. On patrol, every shadow seemed to hold a waiting figure. Every burst of static felt like the precursor to that voice. I started seeing things, or thinking I did. Tall, thin shapes flitting between trees at the edge of my headlights. Eyes reflecting back from the darkness where no animal should be. Once, investigating a reported trespass near an old cemetery overgrown with kudzu, I found strange, bare footprints in the mud, leading towards the oldest. Most sunken graves, then vanishing completely. Brody offered no comfort. When I cautiously mentioned the strange radio interference, he just nodded slowly. Happens, he grunted. Stick to the rules. When I described the footprints, he stared out the window towards the mountains. Lots of things wander these hills, Miller. Best not to follow. His tacit acceptance was more terrifying than denial would have been. Then came the rain. Not a clean spring shower, but a cold, relentless downpour mixed with sleet that turned the back roads into treacherous mud traps. I was checking on the hollows near Black Creek, an area notorious for spotty radio coverage even on good days. The rain hammered against the cruiser, the wipers struggling to clear the windshield. Static hissed and popped constantly from the speaker, and then it coalesced, sharpening. Through the downpour's roar and the static's hiss, a voice emerged, faint at first, then clearer, achingly familiar. Sarah, my heart stopped. Cold dread washed over me, prickling my skin. No, it couldn't be. Sarah? Honey? Can you hear me? The voice was thin, weak, laced with static, but unmistakably hers. Mom's voice. Exactly as I remembered it from those last weeks in the hospital. Frail, but trying to sound strong. Rule 2. If someone calls your name through static and uses your mother's voice, don't respond. Baby, I think I'm lost. It's so dark here. The voice cracked with manufactured fear, a perfect imitation of her vulnerability. Can you help me, Sarah? Please. Just tell me you hear me. Every fiber of my being screamed to answer. Guilt, sharp and immediate, twisted in my gut. This felt like a second chance, a phantom opportunity to respond where I had failed before. What if it was her, somehow? Trapped, needing help? The thought was insane. Impossible. Yet the raw grief made me want to believe. My hand hovered over the radio mic, thumb trembling inches from the transmit button. Just one word. Just Mom? What harm could it do? Don't respond. Brody's grim face flashed in my mind. The cold certainty in his eyes. The unspoken warning. This was a trick. A cruel, calculated mimicry designed to exploit my deepest wound. But the sound of her voice. Sarah, please. I'm scared. A sob, perfectly rendered, laced with static. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I bit down hard on my inner cheek, tasting the coppery tang of blood. I closed my eyes, picturing the rule, picturing Brody's face. Anything but the sound of that voice. Don't respond. Don't respond. Don't respond. I chanted it silently, a desperate mantra against the rising tide of grief and hope. The voice continued for what felt like an eternity, pleading, begging, calling my name, weaving through the static and the drumming rain. Each word was a fresh stab of guilt. Then, as abruptly as it began, it dissolved. The static level returned to its usual hiss, punctuated by the rain. Silence, except for my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. I sat there, shaking, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the cold sweat. I hadn't answered. I had followed the rule. But the feeling wasn't relief. It was a profound, soul-deep violation. Something out there knew my name, knew my grief, and had used my dead mother's voice to torment me. As I sat there, trying to regain control, a pale shape materialized on the rain-streaked passenger window right beside me. A small, perfectly formed handprint, fingers splayed, pressed against the glass from the outside, like a child's hand reaching in the dark. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it faded away into the condensation. I slammed the cruiser into drive, tires spitting mud and gravel, and got the hell out of Black Creek Hollow. The ghost of my mother's voice and the image of that small handprint burning behind my eyes. The rules were real, and whatever lurked in these mountains was just getting started. The drive back from Black Creek Hollow was a blur of rain-slicked roads and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see pale eyes staring back, or the ghost of a small handprint reappearing on the glass. My skin crawled, hearing Mom's voice. It wasn't just scary. It felt like a desecration, a weaponization of my deepest grief. Whatever was out there, it didn't just mimic sounds. It knew where to wound. The anger that simmered beneath the fear was cold and sharp. How dare it? Back at the station, the fluorescent lights seemed too bright. The smell of stale coffee and damp uniforms offensively normal. Brody was hunched over paperwork. Didn't look up immediately when I came in, dripping rainwater onto the worn linoleum. I hesitated, then decided hiding it was pointless. He needed to know. He probably already knew. "Sheriff," I started, my voice rough. "Radio interference up near Black Creek. Bad." He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Fog does that." It wasn't just static, I insisted, meeting his gaze, forcing myself to hold it. It used a voice. Someone I knew. I wouldn't say whose. Not yet. Maybe never. Brody's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The silence stretched, filled only by the buzz of the lights and the drumming rain outside. "Did you answer it, Miller?" he asked finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, sir," I said, the words tight. "I followed the rule." A flicker of something, respect, relief, crossed his face before vanishing. "Good," he grunted. "Some things, they feed on response, on grief." He looked away, towards the rain-lashed window. "They know what buttons to push, especially up that way. Black Creek's got history." He offered no more, turning back to his paperwork. A clear dismissal, but the confirmation, the acknowledgement that it wasn't just in my head, was somehow more chilling than disbelief would have been. "It knows you now." The thought echoed Brody's earlier implied warnings. The next few shifts were a tightrope walk over a pit of paranoia. Every burst of static made my heart leap. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a waiting figure. I found myself avoiding the deeper patrols, sticking closer to the main highway, earning a questioning look from Brody that I ignored. Sleep was fractured, haunted by snippets of mournful fiddle tunes, and a voice that sounded achingly like Mom's calling my name from just beyond a closed door. I started drinking too much coffee, hoping the caffeine would sharpen my senses, but it just amplified the jitters, the feeling of being stretched thin, ready to snap. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I started digging, discreetly, late nights after shifts. I pored over old county records in the station's dusty archive room, searched online forums for local legends, scanned microfiche of the Collier County Chronicle, going back decades. The official records were predictably dry, but the local legends, they were everywhere, whispered online and hinted at in old newspaper articles about unexplained disappearances, hikers vanishing without a trace on clear days, hunters found miles from where they started, rambling about, strange music or lights. One name kept cropping up, the still voice or sometimes the haint of the hollow. Descriptions varied wildly, but the core elements were consistent. Something ancient in the mountains that could mimic sounds, especially the voices of loved ones, luring people off trails, away from safety. Some stories claimed it fed on sorrow, growing stronger near places of grief. Others spoke of sudden, unnatural silences falling over the woods, just before someone vanished forever. Rule 3. My blood ran cold reading it. There were also fragmented tales linked to specific folk songs, warnings woven into lyrics, tales of fiddlers making pacts with shadowed things at crossroads, music that could drive men mad or lead them to their doom. Rule 1. It wasn't just random tunes. The research didn't bring comfort. It only deepened the dread, giving names and shapes to the formless terror that lurked just beyond the glow of my headlights. This wasn't just happening to me. This place was wrong. The call came late on a Thursday night, the air unusually cold and crisp for early spring. Dispatch patched through a garbled report from one of the few occupied cabins up near Hemlock Ridge, an area bordering the state forest, remote even by Collier County standards. The caller, an elderly man named Silas Hayes, claimed someone or something was prowling around his property, making strange noises, rattling his door. His voice was thin with panic. "Probably just a bear, Miller. Brody said over the radio. His voice tinny, but Hayes is old. Lives alone. Go check it out. Standard welfare check. Keep your radio open? Roger that, I replied, already feeling the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Hemlock Ridge was deep territory. The drive up was tense. The gravel road deteriorated quickly, becoming little more than a muddy track winding through dense, dark woods. The trees pressed close, their branches scraping against the cruiser's roof. Radio reception crackled in and out more than once. I thought I heard faint music woven into the static, that same haunting fiddle. But it vanished before I could be sure. My headlights cut a swathe through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes and the occasional pair of glowing eyes reflecting back from the undergrowth before disappearing. Everything felt too quiet, too still. Everything felt too quiet, too still. I found Hayes's cabin tucked deep in a hollow, miles from the nearest neighbor. It was small, dilapidated, porch sagging, only a single yellow light burning in one window. No tracks around the cabin except for old tire ruts. I called out Hayes's name. No answer. The front door was slightly ajar. Unease prickled along my spine. Drawing my service weapon, heart pounding, I pushed the door open. Mr. Hayes? Sheriff's Department. The cabin was cold, musty, sparsely furnished. An old radio sat on a small table. Silent. A half-eaten plate of food sat on the counter, flies buzzing around it. In the back bedroom, I found him. Silas Hayes lay on the floor beside his bed, eyes wide, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. His face frozen in an expression of ultimate terror. No obvious signs of violence. It looked like his heart had just stopped. As I knelt beside him, checking for a pulse I already knew wasn't there, my own radio crackled. Static hissed, then cleared slightly. Sarah? Mom's voice, weak, laced with static, but undeniably hers. Are you there, baby? It's cold. Rule 2. Beat arose in my throat. Not now. Not here. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting down the automatic response. The desperate mom. My hand trembled near the radio on my belt. Just answer me, Sarah. Please. The voice pleaded, catching on a sob. Then abruptly, it cut off. Silence. But not just the voice. The radio went completely dead. No static, no hiss, nothing. And simultaneously, the sounds outside the cabin. The wind whispering through the pines. The chirping of late-night insects. The distant hoot of an owl I'd heard moments before. Utterly ceased. Rule 3. If the radio goes silent and the woods do too. A silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure descended on the small cabin, snuffing out all ambient noise. It pressed against my eardrums, heavy, suffocating, expectant. The air grew deathly still, unnaturally cold. Looking out the grimy window, the trees stood like black cutouts against a starless sky, utterly motionless, the world holding its breath. Get in your car and leave. Immediately, Brody's voice, urgent, commanding in my memory. But Hayes, I couldn't just leave him here. Procedure demanded I secure the scene, call it in, wait for the coroner, for Brody. My cop instincts warred violently with the primal fear screaming at me to obey the rule. The silence stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. The pressure intensified. I felt watched, not just by the dead eyes of Silas Hayes, but by the silent woods outside, by the suffocating stillness itself. Something was out there, close, waiting. Screw procedure. I scrambled backwards, out of the bedroom, stumbling through the dark cabin. Yanking the front door open, I burst out into the unnatural quiet. The air outside was freezing, heavy as water. My breath plumed, the only sound besides the frantic pounding of my own heart. I sprinted towards the cruiser, parked 30 yards away, keys already fumbling in my hand. As I reached the car, wrenching the door open, I risked a glance back towards the cabin. In the single-lit window, silhouetted against the yellow light, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs bent at angles that weren't quite right. All right, it was perfectly still, watching me. I didn't wait to see more. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over, roared to life, shattering the silence like fragile glass. I slammed the gear shift into reverse, tires spinning wildly on the slick mud, and fishtailed back down the track, away from the cabin, away from the silent woods and the figure in the window. I drove for miles, heart hammering, breath sawing in my chest, before the sound finally rushed back in. The wind in the trees, the distant cry of a night bird, the blessed normal hiss of static from the radio. The silence was broken, but I knew with icy certainty I hadn't escaped. I had only postponed. And whatever waited in the stillness of Collier County knew my name, knew my grief, and was patiently waiting for me to break the rules one last time. My headlights cut through the oppressive darkness as I sped away from Hemlock Ridge, tires skidding on the rain-slicked gravel. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white, trying to stop the violent trembling that shook my entire body. The silence had broken miles back, the normal sounds of wind and dripping water rushing back in with a force that made me gasp. But the memory of that absolute suffocating stillness was branded onto my brain, and the figure in the window, tall, thin, wrong. I pulled over when I hit the paved county road, engine idling raggedly, and threw the door open, vomiting the foul coffee in sheer terror onto the wet asphalt. Kneeling there, gasping in the cold, damp air, the ordinary sounds of the night, a distant dog barking, the hum of the engine, seemed fragile, tentative, like a thin veneer over something vast and waiting. The woods pressed close on either side of the road, black and impenetrable, no longer just trees but watchful presences. Getting back in the car, I keyed the radio mic, my voice hoarse. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3, Brenda's voice crackled back, blessedly mundane. "Go ahead, Unit 3. Advised on the welfare check at Hayes Residence, Hemlock Ridge. Subject is 10-7 deceased. Code for out of service. Easier than saying dead." "Roger that. Unit 3. Any sign of foul play?" I hesitated. Foul play? How do you categorize death, possibly induced by supernatural silence or a stick figure in the window? Negative. Dispatch. Appears natural. Elderly male. Alone. But be advised, radio and ambient silence occurred at location. Approx 1:30 hours. Rule 3 conditions met. Cleared location immediately per protocol. A beat of silence on the other end, longer than usual. Then, Brody's voice cut in, overriding Brenda. "Understood, Miller. Proceed back to station. We'll handle Hayes." His tone was flat, unreadable, but held an undercurrent I couldn't decipher. Acceptance? Warning? The rest of the drive was a blur of paranoia. Every flickering shadow seemed to hold movement. Every burst of static sounded like the beginning of Mom's voice. When I finally pulled into the station lot, Brody was waiting by the door, silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent light spilling from inside. "Hayes had a bad heart," he said without preamble as I got out. "Not meeting my eyes. Coroner's preliminary says massive coronary. Probably happened hours before you got there." "The silence, Sheriff," I began, needing more than that dismissive explanation. He finally looked at me, his gaze heavy. "Rule 3 happens, Miller. Means something's close. Something. Attentive. You did right leaving." He clapped a hand briefly on my shoulder, a rare gesture. "Go home. Get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easy. The silence from the woods seemed to have followed me, lurking beneath the ordinary sounds. My small rental cabin outside of town felt less like a refuge and more like a flimsy box. Nightmares plagued me. Mom calling my name from across a silent, fog-filled clearing. The tall, thin figure from Hayes's window standing silently at the foot of my bed. Endless loops of that mournful fiddle tune. I started triple-checking locks, sleeping with my service weapon on the nightstand. Driven by a gnawing obsession, I spent my off-duty hours buried in the station's archives again, cross-referencing old incident reports with the folklore I'd found. Hayes wasn't the first heart attack victim found alone on Hemlock Ridge after reporting strange occurrences. There were others decades apart, dismissed as natural causes. Disappearances clustered around areas mentioned in the folk songs or places notorious for sudden fogs and radio dead zones. Black Creek Hollow, Widow's Ridge, Hemlock Ridge, the old abandoned St. Barnabas church deep in the state forest. Patterns emerged, faint but undeniable, painting a picture of something ancient and predatory woven into the fabric of the county. I found notes stuffed in the back of a drawer in the desk assigned to me. Notes clearly left by Deputy Carson, my predecessor, the one who'd apparently transferred out abruptly. His handwriting grew increasingly erratic. The music changes. Knows what you're thinking. Silence isn't empty. It's listening. And one final chilling entry. Her voice again. Said she forgives me. Going to meet her. St. Barnabas? He'd never filed another report after that day. Brody had told me Carson transferred. Looking at these notes, I had a sickening feeling. Carson hadn't transferred anywhere. He'd answered the voice. He'd walked into the silence. The station itself felt increasingly hostile. Lights buzzed louder, flickered more often. Doors seemed to stick, then open on their own. That faint coppery, ozone smell sometimes permeated the air for no reason. One afternoon, reviewing security footage from the lobby, I saw a flicker on the screen. For a single frame, a tall, thin shadow seemed to detach itself from the corner behind the water cooler, stretch impossibly, then vanish. I rewound, played it frame by frame. Nothing. A glitch? Or was it inside the station now too? My grip on reality felt slippery. Was I projecting my grief and guilt onto explainable phenomena? Or was I the only one seeing the truth because this place, this entity had chosen me? Sensing my vulnerability. The uncertainty was another form of torture. Then came the call that changed everything. It wasn't over the main radio. It was a direct call patched through by Brenda late one evening, just as I was about to end my shift. Her voice sounded strained. Miller, got a strange one. Call came through on the old emergency line, bypassing the main system somehow. It's a kid. A recording played, fuzzy, filled with static, but chillingly clear beneath it. A little girl's voice, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sobbing hysterically. Help me, please. Lost. Mummy went into the church, singing. Won't come out. It's so quiet now. Then the line went dead. Location? I asked, my voice tight, already knowing the answer. GPS ping was weak. Intermittent, Brenda said, hesitation coloring her tone. Looks like somewhere near the old St. Barnabas ruins, deep in the state forest. St. Barnabas, where Carson's last note said he was going, where the disappearances sometimes clustered, where the girl said her mother went in, singing. It's probably a prank, Miller, Brenda added quickly, maybe sensing my reaction. Or faulty equipment picking up stray signals. But I knew it wasn't. The cold dread coiling in my stomach told me otherwise. A child? Lost? Her mother drawn in by the singing. And now? The silence? I'm closest, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Heading that way now. Miller, wait. Brody's voice suddenly cut in. Sharp. Authoritative. He must have been monitoring. Don't go alone. Wait for backup. Kid could be freezing or hurt, Sheriff, I argued. already pulling out of the lot, ignoring the protocol screaming in my head. Guilt surged, not just for Mom, but for this unknown child, this mother lured by the song. Maybe I could save them. Maybe that was the way out of my own personal hell. Sarah, damn it, listen to me. Brody's use of my first name was a shock. His voice tight with genuine alarm. That area? St. Barnabas. You don't go there after dark. Not alone. That's an order. But his voice was already fading, swallowed by static as I drove faster, pushing the cruiser up the winding road leading towards the state forest entrance, towards the abandoned church, towards the silence I knew was waiting. The rules, the warnings, they didn't matter anymore. A child was lost, a mother was missing, and maybe, just maybe, facing whatever lurked in that silence was the only way to confront the ghosts that haunted me, both inside and out. The woods closed in, dark and absolute. The radio hissed. I gripped the wheel, accelerator pressed down, driving into the heart of the mountain's darkness. The cruiser bounced violently over the rutted track, branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. My headlights cut weakly through the oppressive darkness. The state forest seemed to swallow the light just feet from the bumper. Brody's panicked order to wait, to not go alone, echoed uselessly against the roar of the engine and the frantic thudding of my own heart. Guilt was a powerful engine. Guilt for Mom. Guilt for the sobbing child on the line. Guilt for maybe, just maybe, bringing this darkness down on Collier County by being here, by being weak. But underneath it, something else hardened. A cold, sharp anger. Whatever haunted these woods had used my mother's voice, preyed on grief. It deserved to be confronted. The track ended abruptly in a small, overgrown clearing. Through the skeletal remains of ancient oak trees, I saw it. St. Barnabas, or what was left of it. A stone shell, roof long collapsed. Dark empty windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath a shroud of ivy and kudzu. A crumbling bell tower listed precariously to one side. The air here was heavy, still, unnaturally cold. No sign of another vehicle. No sign of a child. Just the ruins, radiating a palpable aura of neglect and deep-seated wrongness. I cut the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the frantic ticking of the cooling engine block. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and my service weapon, the cold weight of the Glock reassuring in my trembling hand. Stepping out of the car, the cold hit me like a physical blow. The smell was thick, damp earth, decaying leaves, mildew, and beneath it all, that faint, sharp tang of ozone. Stronger here than anywhere else. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small, absorbed by the oppressive quiet. "Is anyone here? This is the sheriff's department." Only silence answered, a silence that felt curated, waiting. Flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. I approached the church ruins cautiously. Strange symbols, similar to the one on Brody's desk, but more complex, were carved into the crumbling stone around the main archway, almost obscured by moss. The wooden doors had long rotted away, leaving a gaping black maw. As I stepped closer to the threshold, it began. Not from the radio this time. It seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, from the air, from the surrounding trees, the haunting melody of the fiddle, joined by the clear, sorrowful voice, singing the same folk song I'd heard on the radio. Shadows walk in secret sleep. The sound was all around me. Inside my head, hypnotic, pulling at the edges of my grief. Rule 1. But there was no radio to turn off. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself forward, fighting the urge to just sit down and weep, to let the sorrowful music wash over me. "I hear you," I shouted, trying to sound authoritative over the pounding in my chest. I know you're there. Is there a child here? The music faltered for a beat, then swelled again. And through it, closer now, seemingly from inside the dark ruins, another voice threaded itself into the melody. Sarah? Honey, is that you? Mom's voice, weak, frightened, laced with an echo that didn't belong. I came in, followed the singing. So beautiful. But now I can't get out. Help me, Sarah. Rule 2. Bile rose in my throat. Mom, the name slipped out. A choked whisper, before I could stop it. A mistake. A potentially fatal one. The singing intensified, becoming triumphant, almost gloating. The voice continued. Yes, baby. It's me. I'm in here. Come find me. It's dark. Don't respond. But I already had. What now? Didn't know it had me. I raised my flashlight, sweeping the beam into the blackness of the church interior. Collapsed pews, rubble, roots breaking through the stone floor. Nothing moved. Please, Sarah. I don't want to be alone here again, the voice sobbed, hitting every raw nerve of guilt I possessed. I'm coming, I shouted, stepping over the threshold, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, weapon held high. Maybe I could find the child. The mother. Get them out. Maybe confronting this thing, rules be damned, was the only way. The moment my boots hit the crumbling stone floor inside the ruins, everything stopped. The music, the voice, the wind outside. The frantic beating of my own heart seemed to echo once, twice, then get swallowed by absolute, consuming silence. Rule 3. The air pressure plummeted, making my ears pop painfully. The darkness inside the ruins became absolute, my powerful flashlight beam seeming to stop just feet in front of me, absorbed by a blackness that felt solid. Suffocating. The smell of damp earth and decay intensified tenfold, thick and cloying as grave dirt. Panic seized me. Leave. Immediately. But I was inside now. The gaping doorway behind me seemed impossibly far away. Maybe not even there anymore. I spun around. Flashlight beam hitting only impenetrable black. Trapped. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of presence. Full of ancient, malevolent attention fixed solely on me. I could feel it pressing in, cold and heavy, stealing the air from my lungs. Then movement in the darkness ahead, where the altar might have once stood. Not a sound. Just a flicker. A distortion in the absolute black. My flashlight beam hit it, and recoiled as if shying away. It unfolded itself from the shadows. Tall, impossibly thin. Like the figure I'd seen in Hayes' window, but clearer now. Somehow more real. Limbs like brittle branches wrapped in shadow, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. It had no discernible features, yet I felt the intense weight of its gaze. Was this the source? The still voice? The haint? It didn't approach. It just stood there, radiating cold and silence. Then, slowly, shapes began to detach themselves from the deeper shadows around it. Smaller figures, vaguely human, shuffling, indistinct. Were they other victims? Carson? The woman from the call? Yes, Hayes. Their forms wavered, indistinct, like smoke. My breath hitched. My gun felt impossibly heavy. Would bullets even work on whatever this was? The central figure raised a long branch-like arm, and the sound returned, but not the world's sound. It was the voice again, Mom's voice, but distorted now, amplified, coming from the figure itself, from the air, from inside my own head. Stay, Sarah. Stay with us. You don't have to be alone anymore. She forgives you. We all forgive you. Visions flooded my mind, triggered by the voice, by the entity's presence. Mom's face, contorted in pain, the flashing lights of the ambulance, my own face reflected in a hospital window, hollow with exhaustion and guilt. The arguments, the missed calls, it hammered at me, wave after wave of weaponized grief. "No!" I screamed, the sound shockingly loud in the preceding silence, but it felt weak, absorbed by the presence before me. "You're not her. Get out of my head." The figure tilted its head, a parody of curiosity. The smaller shapes shuffled closer. The distorted voice continued, weaving promises of forgiveness, of reunion, of an end to sorrow. If I just stayed, joined them in the silence, my training kicked in, overriding the grief, the terror. Threat assessment. Find a weakness. Exploit it. Rule 3 was triggered by silence. What if noise disrupted it? Raising my pistol, aiming not at the shifting figures but towards the crumbling stone ceiling above the main entity, I squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was apocalyptic in the stillness, an ear-splitting crack that slammed against the oppressive silence, shattering it. The sound echoed, amplified, bouncing off the stone walls. The effect was instant violent. The tall figure shrieked, a sound that wasn't human or animal, but like grinding stone and tearing static, clutching at where its head should be. The smaller figures recoiled, flickering like disturbed smoke. The absolute darkness wavered, the flashlight beam suddenly punching further, revealing more of the ruined altar, covered in strange, wet, fungal growths. The oppressive pressure lessened fractionally. Noise. It hated noise. Get back, I yelled, firing again towards the ceiling. The sound even louder this time. Debris rained down. The main figure staggered back, its form flickering wildly. The smaller shapes dissipated further, drawn back towards the deeper shadows. Another shot. The figure shrieked again, raising its arms as if to ward off the sound. It seemed diminished, somehow less solid. This was it, my chance. Not towards the blocked entrance, towards the side. There had been a smaller, collapsed archway I'd noticed on the way in, half buried in rubble but potentially leading outside. Keeping my flashlight beam pinned on the recoiling central entity, I backed away, then turned and sprinted towards the side archway, firing another shot blindly behind me as I ran. The shriek echoed again. Filled with rage, I scrambled over fallen stones, through grasping ivy towards the arch. It was a tight squeeze, blocked by fallen timbers. Behind me, I heard a rapid shuffling, faster than before, no longer trying to be silent. It was coming after me. It was coming after me, with a final, desperate heave. I squeezed through a gap between a heavy beam and the crumbling stone frame, tearing my jacket, scraping my arm, tumbling out onto wet leaves and cold earth. I was outside. I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back at the dark ruins, and run through the silent watching trees, ignoring the branches that tore at my clothes. Ran towards the faint, distant glow of my cruiser's parking lights. The only sound, my own panicked gasping and the frantic pounding of my heart against the frantic pounding of my heart against the suffocating silence of the woods. I burst from the tree line, lungs screaming, legs pumping on pure adrenaline, ignoring the thorns tearing at my uniform, the sharp sting of cuts on my arms and face. The cruiser's parking lights were a faint beacon in the oppressive darkness, 30 yards away across the clearing. Behind me, the silence from the church ruins pressed like a physical weight, a suffocating blanket devoid of even the memory of sound. Had it followed me out, or was it content for now within its desecrated walls? My hand closed around the cold metal of the car door handle. It felt blessedly solid, real. I fumbled with the lock, key scraping uselessly for a moment before finding the slot. Wrenching the door open, I threw myself inside, slamming it shut, hitting the lock button with a panicked jab. The heavy thud of the door closing was the first real sound I'd heard since the gunshot. And it was glorious, painful, shocking. For a moment, I just sat there, hyperventilating, back pressed against the seat, eyes scanning the dark tree line through the windshield. Nothing moved. No tall, thin figure emerged. No shuffling shapes. Only the black, silent trees watching. My service weapon was still clutched in my hand, heavy, smelling faintly of cordate. My flashlight lay on the floor where I'd dropped it, scrambling in. Keys in the ignition. Turn. The engine roared to life. Another blessed violation of the silence. I didn't bother trying to turn around. Slamming the gear shift into reverse, I stomped on the accelerator. Tires spun, spitting mud and gravel, then caught. The cruiser lurched backwards, away from the clearing, away from the oppressive ruins of St. Barnabas. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I drove like a bat out of hell, fishtailing on the muddy track, fighting the wheel, only slowing when I absolutely had to navigate a sharp turn. The silence persisted. Inside the car, the only sounds were the engine's roar, my own ragged breathing, and the frantic thumping of my heart. The world outside the windows remained utterly, unnaturally still. Miles crawled by under my tires. How far did this silence extend? Was it spreading? Then, abruptly, it broke. Like surfacing from deep underwater, sound rushed back in with dizzying force. The drumming of rain that had started again. The sigh of wind through the pines. The distant screech of some night bird. The crunch of my tires on gravel. It was overwhelming, almost painful after the absolute void. I gasped, pulling over sharply, engine idling, listening to the mundane symphony of the forest night. Tears of sheer relief stinging my eyes. But beneath the relief, a deeper chill settled. The normal sounds felt thin now, like a cheap costume draped over the memory of that terrible waiting stillness. Adrenaline ebbed, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and violent shaking. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, taking inventory. Cut, scrapes, torn uniform, nerves shot to hell. But alive. I faced Rule 3, broken it by making noise, and somehow, impossibly gotten away. But the images burned. The blank-faced entity, the pale handprint, the figure in Hayes's window, the shuffling shapes in the church, the thing that wore my mother's voice, my radio. It hissed beside me, emitting only static, but it was on. The dead silence was gone. I picked up the mic, hand trembling. Dispatch, this is Unit 3, radio check. A burst of static, then Brenda's voice, tinny but clear. Receiving you, Unit 3. Those signals weak. Everything all right out there? Sheriff spin. Concerned. Right. 10-4. Dispatch, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Encountered some difficulty near the St. Barnabas site. Scene is clear now. Repeat. Scene is clear. Returning station. I couldn't bring myself to say more over the open channel. The drive back felt longer. The familiar roads alien. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every bend held a potential ambush. When I finally saw the lights of the town, then the station, the relief was profound but tainted. This wasn't over. Brody was waiting inside, just like after Hemlock Ridge. This time, he didn't bother pretending to do paperwork. He just stood by the window, looking out towards the dark mountains, a half-empty mug of coffee in his hand. He turned as I entered, his eyes immediately taking in my disheveled state. The mud, the torn sleeve, the haunted look I could feel plastered on my face. Report, he said quietly, his voice flat. I told him. Not everything, not yet. I told him about the coal, the empty church, the Rule 3 silence descending, firing my weapon into the ruins to break it, and getting out fast. I left out the specific voices, the figures, the direct confrontation. Even to Brody, it sounded insane. Even to Brody, it sounded insane. He listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee. "Saint Barnabas," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Should never have sent you, even if it was a kid." He looked at me then, his eyes holding that familiar weariness, but also something else. A flicker of grim understanding. "You fired your weapon?" "Yes, sir." "Into the ceiling?" "To break the silence." He nodded slowly. "Noise disrupts it temporarily. Good instinct." He paused. "You hear or see anything specific?" While the silence was down, my throat tightened. How much did he know? How much could I risk saying? Just disorientation, Sheriff. Shadows. Hard to see clearly. A half-truth. He held my gaze for a long moment. "Carson," he said abruptly, his voice low. "Your predecessor, he went up there. Didn't come back. Found his cruiser empty on the track a week later. Logbook just had one entry for that day. Going to meet her. St. Barnabas." My blood ran cold. It confirmed the notes I'd found. Carson hadn't transferred. He'd answered the voice. He'd walked into the silence and never walked out. "Whatever's up there, Miller," Brody continued, his voice rough. "It's old. Older than these mountains, maybe. It knows people. Knows what they want to hear. Knows what they fear." He drained his mug. "You were lucky, fearing your weapon. It probably bought you time. But it doesn't stop it. Nothing stops it for long." "So what do we do?" I asked, the question sounding naive even to my own ears. Brody sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "We follow the rules. We don't poke the bear. We stick to the main roads when we can. And we hope it stays up in the high hollows where it belongs." He looked me straight in the eye. "File your report. Damaged property from discharging weapon due to perceived threat in low visibility conditions. Keep it simple. Keep it out of the paperwork." "Understood." I understood. Cover up. Denial. Survival. That was the real law in Collier County. Back at my cabin an hour later, after scrubbing the mud and the lingering chill off my skin in a scalding shower, the adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow, aching exhaustion. I locked the doors, checked the windows, moved through the small rooms feeling exposed, vulnerable. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside sounded like something trying to get in. I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The cuts and scrapes were minor, but my eyes, they looked different, older, haunted. They looked, I realized with a jolt, disturbingly like Sheriff Brody's. On the nightstand, beside my service weapon, my gaze fell on the small, smooth gray stone I'd picked up near Platform 3. At the train station in my previous life. Wait, no, that wasn't this story. Shaking my head, trying to clear the exhaustion-fueled confusion. My eyes landed instead on my uniform jacket, tossed over a chair. Something was caught on the torn sleeve. Not a leaf, not a twig. It was a tiny shred of fabric. Dark, damp, smelling faintly of lilies and old earth. Days bled into nights, marked by the endless cycle of patrol shifts, jumpy nerves, and the gnawing dread that had become my constant companion. I kept the shred of dark, damp fabric tucked away in an evidence bag, locked in my locker. It felt like holding on to a piece of a nightmare. It smelled faintly of lilies and cold earth, a scent that sometimes seemed to waft through the cruiser or my cabin for no reason, triggering a Pavlovian surge of ice-cold fear. Whose was it? The figure in the church? The woman who vanished near Platform 3 in that other life? No. Focus, Sarah. Wrong nightmare. Was it connected to the entity? A remnant of another victim? Another unanswered question in a county built on them. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. I could. When I did drift off, nightmares clawed their way in. The suffocating silence, the figure in the window, Mom's voice twisting from pleading to accusation, the grinding roar of the impossible train. Wrong story again. Damn it. Damn it! The impossible silence of the woods, the figure in the church. Mom's voice laced with static. I'd wake up gasping, heart pounding, the lines blurring between the horrors of Collier County and the unresolved grief I tried to bury here. On duty, I was a wreck, though I tried desperately to hide it. Every crackle on the radio made me flinch. Every patch of fog felt like a shroud descending. Every stretch of quiet woods felt like the breath before the scream. I found myself driving faster, avoiding the deepest hollows, cutting patrols short near dusk. Brody watched me. I felt his gaze during briefings, saw him tracking my cruiser on the dispatch map. He didn't comment on my shorter patrol times or the dark circles under my eyes, but his silence was heavy, knowing. He assigned me more highway duty, fewer ridge runs, protection, or just managing a deputy he knew was cracking. The locals treated me differently too. The polite suspicion hardened into something else. Wary respect, maybe, or just fear. They'd nod curtly, eyes skittering away, sometimes making a strange sign with their hands, thumb tucked, fingers crossed, when they thought I wasn't looking. One old woman at the general store pressed a small bundle of dried herbs into my hand while I paid for coffee. For protection, she whispered, her eyes bright and fearful, against things that listened too close. I kept the herbs in my pocket, feeling foolish, but not foolish enough to throw them away. I tried to stop digging into the county's past, tried to follow Brody's implicit order to just survive, just do the job, keep it out of the reports, but the obsession gnawed at me. Knowing Carson had walked willingly into St. Barnabas after hearing the voice, knowing Silas Hayes died staring at his ceiling in terror, it wasn't enough to just survive the rules. I needed to understand why. I needed to understand why. One rain-soaked afternoon, unable to face another restless attempt at sleep, I found myself back in the station's archive room, not looking for incident reports this time, but for older records, property deeds, church histories, anything related to St. Barnabas before it became ruins. I found a brittle, leather-bound county ledger from the late 1800s. Most entries were mundane, births, deaths, land sales, but one entry, dated 1888, caught my eye. It detailed the deconsecration and abandonment of St. Barnabas Church following the unexplained disappearance of the parish priest, Father Michael, and several members of his congregation during a period of communal spiritual distress and strange melancholies attributed to failed crops and harsh winters. Tucked into the back of the ledger, pressed flat like a forgotten bookmark, was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was a handwritten letter, the ink faded but legible, signed by Father Michael himself, dated just days before his disappearance. The singing has returned, it read. Louder this year, the melodies seep in, promising solace but bringing only sorrow. It whispers in the static between worlds, wearing the voices of the lost to draw others near. Young Thomas claimed his departed sister, called him to the woods last night. We restrain him now, but his eyes hold the hollow look. The silence fell upon the hollow yesterday. The flock grows fearful. I must go to the old stones tonight, where the first church stood. Appeasement is necessary. The bargain must be kept, for the sake of the valley. May God forgive me. The old stones, a bargain, appeasement. It wasn't just a random entity. It was tied to this land, to its history, maybe even to a deliberate pact. And St. Barnabas wasn't the beginning. It was built near something older. A cold wave washed over me. Brody knew. The town, at least the older families they knew. The rules weren't just for survival. They were part of maintaining a terrible balance. An old bargain Father Michael wrote about over a century ago. Don't listen. Don't respond. Run from the silence. Not just to save yourself, but perhaps to avoid provoking something. To avoid upsetting the fragile peace. My arrival, my encounters, Carson's disappearance, were they cracks in that peace? That night, exhaustion finally claimed me. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, only to be jolted awake hours later by a sound. Silence. The profound, unnatural silence of Rule 3. But I wasn't on patrol. I was in my cabin. Panic seized me. I scrambled for my weapon on the nightstand, heart hammering. The silence was absolute. No wind, no crickets, no hum from the refrigerator. Just suffocating stillness. I crept to the window, peering out into the moonless dark. Nothing moved. The trees were black, motionless sentinels. Then, on my nightstand, the screen of my personal cell phone lit up. It hadn't worked reliably since I got here. Now, it displayed one bar of signal, and one new text message. Sender, unknown. The message contained only 3 words. Will remember you. The silence held. The message glowed. It wasn't a question this time. It was a statement. A promise. They knew I was here. They knew I didn't remember, not really, and the rules felt suddenly, terrifyingly inadequate. They were instructions for avoidance, not confrontation. But confrontation felt inevitable now. My hand closed around the cold metal of my Glock. I looked from the phone's ominous message to the silent watching woods outside my window. Brody's way, the way of denial, of appeasement, of just surviving, felt like a slow death, waiting for the entity to finally claim me like it claimed Carson. There had to be another way. Understand the bargain. Find the old stones Father Michael mentioned. Maybe confrontation was the answer, but on different terms. Not just reacting, but acting. The silence outside remained absolute, but inside me, something shifted. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but now mixed with a grim, reckless resolve. I wouldn't be another tally mark. I wouldn't be another whisper in the static. My choice was made. Tomorrow, I wasn't just going on patrol. I was going hunting. Hunting for answers, deep in the heart of Collier County's darkness.